Tensions boiling over at the U.S.-Mexico border. U.S. Border Patrol agents deployed tear gas on Central Americans seeking asylum. This does include women and children during an incident near one of the world's busiest border crossings. Mexico says that 39 people were arrested after a peaceful march devolved into chaos. Some officials say that 500 migrants rushed the border from the Mexican side in Tijuana, overwhelming police blockades. The San Ysidro port is back open after being shut down for hours on Sunday.
So the unrest at the border providing new fuel for President Trump. Over the weekend, the president tweeted that migrants seeking asylum in the U.S. will be forced to stay in Mexico while their claims are decided. But the incoming Mexican government denies any deal exists with the U.S. about these migrants.
All right, joining us now is Rodney Scott, Chief Patrol Agent of the San Diego Sector Border Patrol. Chief, thank you very much for being with us. We've been looking at these pictures for the last 20 hours or so. You've been right in the middle of it watching. We're lucky to have you on this morning. Explain the decision to use the tear gas, because that is one question I think people have this morning.
So one of our primary missions is to make sure that we keep the border safe and secure. I kind of challenged that this was a peaceful protest or that the majority of these people were claiming asylum. We ended up making about 42 arrests. Only 8 of those were females, and there were only a few children involved. The vast majority of the people we're dealing with are adult males. Similar to what we saw the first wave of the caravan that came up about a week or so ago, the group immediately started throwing rocks and debris at our agents, taunting the agents. And once our agents were assaulted and the numbers started growing, we had 2 or 3 agents at a time initially facing hundreds of people at a time. They deployed tear gas to protect themselves and to protect the border.
Were any of your agents hurt?
So at least 3 agents were actually struck by rocks, but they were in tactical gear, so their helmets and their shields and their bulletproof vest actually protected them from the rocks. We did have a few vehicles that were damaged, some windows, and quite a few dents. But none of the agents were seriously injured.
And you just gave us a bit of news this morning, because we had been reporting that there were 39 arrests on the Mexican side of the border. We're hearing from the first time for you that there were 42 arrests on the U.S. side, so 42 people did manage to cross the border?
That is correct. 42 crossed the border and were arrested. To be completely frank, there were numerous people that actually made it across the border. We're in the process of building the new border wall here, but we don't have it completed. There were some sections that had the dilapidated border wall that was made out of scrap metal the military gave us. The group breached a couple sections of that, actually tore down one small section, started to rush across, and that's another time that they started assaulting our agents. We were able to hold them back using riot techniques. But there were ultimately 42 arrests of individuals. And again, as I mentioned, the vast majority of those were adult males.
Did you feel as if you had enough agents at the border to handle this situation? Were your people overwhelmed?
We were able to manage this and effectively control this, but I want to be clear that all of our agents on a daily basis are fully employed. We had to bring in several hundred additional Border Patrol agents from around the country, several hundred additional CBP officers from around the country. That's affecting our operations in other areas. But the fact that no one made it across the border or past our defenses, I would say we were adequately staffed. But it was not without a cost.
And this was Customs Border Patrol personnel. This was not U.S. military personnel engaged in this conflict directly. Is that correct?
That's correct. Customs and Border Protection personnel. DOD is here helping us with logistical support. They actually flew another 59 agents in and officers in from El Centro, the next sector over for us, and they were helping provide overwatch, but they were not doing any law enforcement role.
So at the outset of this interview, you took issue with the idea that these were people seeking asylum. The caravan, though, the 5,000 to 9,000, depending on which count you believe, that is in Tijuana right now, those are people coming to the border, as far as you know, for asylum, isn't it?
I do not believe that is true. I believe there are definitely people in that group that are going to try to claim asylum. The vast majority of those from what we call the Northern Triangle are economic migrants, though. They do not meet the qualifications to get asylum here. They can still apply. That's a different issue. However, what I saw on the border yesterday was not people walking up to Border Patrol agents and asking to claim asylum. Matter of fact, one of the groups that I watched, one of the groups that actually several of them were arrested, they passed 10 or 15 marked Border Patrol units walking east to west, or west to east, I'm sorry. Numerous uniformed personnel as they were chanting, waving a Honduran flag, and throwing rocks at the agents. If they were truly asylum seekers, they would have just walked up with their hands up and surrendered, and that did not take place.
What we understand has happened, and I'm not disputing that there are rocks being thrown, is that these are among the group that had been in Tijuana in that stadium, and they grew frustrated, they say, because they didn't believe their applications were being processed quickly enough. Now, I understand, CBP, you don't do the asylum processing. That's not your job. However, let me ask you if you think your job would be made easier by a smoother, a more streamlined, a quicker assimilation process.
So that's quite often a question. I believe there's a lot of issues with our current immigration policy, if you will, the laws. I think Congress is, we've made very clear to Congress what some of those fixes are. I think they could step in at any point in time and make some legislative changes to help us out tremendously. But we're at capacity. So it doesn't matter what port you go to, where you're at. We are already arresting at 2,000 people a day. We're processing just at San Ysidro over 100,000 legitimate trade and travel every day, 100,000 people, if you will. So any additional resources we assign to processing asylum seekers literally slows down the economy of the United States. It slows down people that legitimately cross back and forth across our borders, to include the international airports that many of you, I'm sure, fly in. Mm-hmm. We get complaints constantly about the lines as they are, and we just have limited resources.
I do understand that. I guess what I'm getting at, as we talk about a more comprehensive process to fixing the situation at the border, if making the process quicker would make your life easier. You did answer, though, that question largely. You said that you arrested mostly men at the border there. The pictures have included women and children, and there are those questioning, again, the use of the tear gas on the women and children. Is there some barrier in place to the use when women and children specifically, might be at risk?
So the use of those less lethal techniques are when the threat is to our personnel or to protect others, you've got to do what you got to do. What I find unconscionable is that people would intentionally take children into this situation. Mm-hmm. What we saw over and over yesterday was that the group, the caravan as we call them, would push women and children towards the front and then begin basically rocking our agents. So there's different types of tools that we use, different types of CS deployment. We try to target specifically the instigators, specifically the person assaulting the agent. But as you saw from the video, once that chemical is released, it does go through the air. I was in an area where I actually inhaled quite a bit of it yesterday as well. That's what's going to happen in those situations.
Chief Rodney Scott, we do appreciate you being with us this morning. It's early out there, and you've had a lot of work over the last 24 hours and more work to do. So we do appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you for having me on this morning. I really appreciate it.